forest is dark and frozen. A hillside near a small village in Czechoslovakia is scattered with twisted metal, shattered glass, and silence. Then, somewhere beneath the wreckage, something stirs. A sound rises through the cold January air. Not wind, not the creak of settling debris, but a human voice, screaming. One of the most unimaginable survival stories in recorded history is about to begin, and the woman at the center of it has no idea what just happened to her. If a story this remarkable has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe right now, because what actually kept this woman alive goes so far beyond what you'd expect, you might find yourself questioning whether anything in this world is truly left to chance. Her name was Vesna Vulović. She was 22 years old, Serbian by birth, and just 8 months into her career as a flight attendant when January 26, 1972 changed everything. She had grown up in Belgrade with a love of music, adventure, and the open world beyond Yugoslavia's borders. After traveling to London to study English, she caught the travel bug. When she learned that a friend was becoming a flight attendant and seeing the world, Vesna didn't hesitate. She wanted that life. There was just one problem. Vesna had chronically low blood pressure, the kind of reading that typically disqualifies a candidate from a flight attendant medical exam. She knew it. So just before heading in to be evaluated, she drank several cups of coffee, hoping the caffeine would push her numbers into an acceptable range. It worked. She passed the exam and entered training with Jet Airways, Yugoslavia's national carrier. That small act of determination, coffee, and clever thinking on a nervous morning would resurface years later in one of the most extraordinary medical explanations doctors had ever offered for why a human being survived something that should have been unsurvivable. By January 1972, Vesna had been flying for less than a year. She was young, curious, and still collecting first experiences from every city she landed in. When JAT scheduling department accidentally assigned her to Flight 367, confusing her name with another attendant also named Vesna, she had no hesitation about taking the shift. The route would carry her to Copenhagen, Denmark, a country she had never visited. She was happy about the mix-up. She boarded Flight 367 with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything. The Douglas DC-9 aircraft departed Copenhagen Airport at 3:15 in the afternoon on January 26th. 27 other passengers and crew were on board. The sky was clear. The flight was routine. 46 minutes after takeoff, cruising at more than 33,000 feet over the mountain ranges of Czechoslovakia, the plane exploded. A bomb had been hidden in the baggage compartment. Investigators later concluded it was planted during the stopover in Copenhagen, believed to be the work of Croatian nationalist extremists, though no arrests were ever made and no one was ever charged. At 4:01 in the afternoon, the device detonated. The fuselage of the DC-9 tore apart in midair, scattering wreckage and human beings across a frozen sky 6 miles above the Earth. Every other person on that aircraft died. Most were almost certainly killed instantly or pulled out of the disintegrating cabin in temperatures far below freezing at an altitude where the air contains barely enough oxygen to keep a person conscious. 27 lives ended in seconds. Vesna survived because of where she was standing. At the moment of the explosion, she was in the middle section of the aircraft, working near the food service area. As the fuselage broke apart, the food cart pinned her against the interior of the plane, preventing her from being sucked out along with the others. A section of the fuselage remained partially intact around her, while the rest of the aircraft disintegrated and scattered across the atmosphere. The portion containing Vesna fell as a broken but enclosed unit, descending through 6 miles of freezing air toward the wooded hillsides below. She was unconscious for all of it. She never felt herself fall. She had no memory of the explosion, no awareness of the plunge, no moment of terror. The last thing she would ever remember from that day was greeting passengers at the door of the aircraft before takeoff in Denmark. What saved her next was the ground itself. The fuselage section fell into a heavily forested hillside near the small Czechoslovakian village of Srpska Kamenice. The dense pine trees absorbed and broke much of the force on impact. The hillside was blanketed in deep snow, which cushioned the final collision. The wreckage skidded down the slope and came to rest amid the trees, and somehow, within the broken shell of the aircraft, Vesna Vulović was still alive. Bruno Honka heard her first, a resident of the nearby village. Honka was outside when he caught a faint sound drifting through the dark forest, screaming. He followed it through the trees and found the debris field. He found the wreckage. Within it, bloodied and barely conscious, he found Vesna. What makes Honka's arrival even more significant is that he was not simply a bystander. During World War II, he had served as a battlefield medic. He knew exactly what to do. He stayed with her, kept her alive, and held the situation together in the dark and cold until emergency rescuers could reach the remote hillside. When medical teams finally extracted her and transported her to a hospital in Prague, the list of injuries was staggering. She had a fractured skull with hemorrhaging to the brain. 3 vertebrae were broken, one of them completely crushed. Both legs were broken. Her pelvis was shattered. Her ribs were fractured. She was paralyzed from the waist down. She fell into a coma that lasted 10 days. When she finally regained consciousness, she had no memory of the crash, the fall, or her rescue. She remembered greeting passengers. Then she remembered seeing her mother and father standing at her hospital bedside. Everything in between was simply gone. The first thing she asked for when she woke up was a cigarette. Doctors who treated her could not fully explain why she was alive. Her injuries were catastrophic. And yet the fact that she had survived impact from more than 6 miles up without any protective equipment defied every model of human survivability. 2 theories emerged from the medical and aviation communities, and both pointed to a remarkable confluence of circumstance. First, her position within the aircraft, pinned by the cart, enclosed in the fuselage section, cushioned by trees and snow, had protected her body from the worst physics of the fall. Second, and perhaps most strikingly, her physicians believed that her chronically low blood pressure had prevented her heart from bursting on impact. The very condition that had almost cost her the career she loved, the defect she had tried to hide with cups of coffee on a nervous morning before a medical exam, may have been the biological quirk that kept her heart beating when the fuselage hit the hillside. Her recovery was long, difficult, and at times deeply painful. She was temporarily paralyzed. She underwent extensive treatment in Prague and was later transferred to a hospital in Belgrade, where she was kept under around-the-clock guard. She fought her way back with remarkable stubbornness. Within 10 months of the crash, she was walking again. Doctors had never expected her to reach that milestone. She exceeded every prognosis they offered her. She would tell the New York Times in 2008, "I was broken, and the doctors put me back together again. Nobody ever expected me to live this long." Vesna returned to J Airways, but the airline placed her in a desk job handling freight contracts rather than returning her to the cabin crew. Officials felt her presence on flights would draw too much attention to the accident. She reportedly disagreed with that reasoning, believing she was ready to fly again, but she accepted the role and continued to work for the airline for years. In 1985, the Guinness Book of World Records officially recognized her achievement and inducted her into its Hall of Fame for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. The certificate was presented to her by Paul McCartney, whose music had once made a trip to Copenhagen sound like exactly the kind of adventure a young woman from Belgrade should jump at. But life after survival was not simple. For decades, Vesna carried survivor's guilt that weighed on her privately, even as the public celebrated her as a national hero. "Whenever I think of the accident," she told The Independent in 2012, "I have a prevailing, grave feeling of guilt for surviving it, and I cry. Then I think maybe I should not have survived at all." She declined offers of psychological therapy and instead turned to the Orthodox Christian faith, finding in it a framework for understanding something that had no rational answer. She came to view her survival not as luck but as destiny. That belief helped her carry what she carried. She also channeled her public profile into political courage. When Yugoslavia began its collapse in the late 1980s and authoritarian nationalism tightened its grip on Serbia, Vesna used her celebrity to push back. She joined protests against President Slobodan Milosevic, risking her livelihood and her freedom to stand on the side of democracy. JAT fired her in the early 1990s for her involvement in the protests. But the government, well aware of the international attention her name carried, chose not to arrest her. Even in politics, her survival protected her. She never regained the memories she lost. The entire event, the explosion, the fall, the dark forest, Bruno Hanke's voice, the rescue, remained a permanent blank in her mind. She would spend the rest of her life knowing intellectually what had happened to her, reading accounts of it, seeing photographs, listening to descriptions, without ever being able to access any of it from the inside. In a strange way, the woman who held the world record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute had no personal experience of falling at all. She continued to fly as a passenger throughout her life, feeling no fear of it. She told interviewers she felt optimistic about life, that her ordeal had shaped her into someone who believed in endurance. "If you can survive what I survived," she said, "you can survive anything." Vesna Vulović died in December 2016 at the age of 66, found by friends in her Belgrade apartment. She had lived 44 years beyond a moment when everyone around her died and everything pointed toward the same outcome for her. She remains, to this day, the world record holder for the highest fall survived without a parachute. No one has come close to that record. No one has come close to that story. Near the village of Srbska Kamenice in the northern Czech Republic, a small monument marks the place where the fuselage came to rest in the snow on that January evening. It is a quiet site not often visited, easy to miss along a rural road, but it is where something happened that science can partially explain and only partially believe. It is where a woman fell from the edge of space and the Earth somehow held her. She preferred to call it destiny rather than luck. She spent the rest of her life trying to understand why she was the one who lived when 27 others did not. She found her answer in faith. She found her footing again in courage. And she spent 4 more decades proving that surviving is only the beginning of what a person can do. What do you believe? Was Vesna Vulović's survival a product of physics and circumstance? Or is there something more that science simply cannot account for? Leave your thoughts below. This is the kind of story that deserves a conversation.